At precisely 2:47 p.m. on December 16th, 2025, in a cramped congressional briefing room where winter light filtered through bulletproof windows, Kash Patel sat motionless as a decade-old promise detonated in his face like a carefully placed explosive. His career as FBI director nominee, meticulously constructed through years of calculated loyalty, suddenly hung by the thinnest of threads. How does a man who thunderously promised to release every page of the Epstein files in 2023 become the same man claiming the courts won't allow it in 2025? And why did Congressman Thomas Massie, normally measured and analytical, explode with a single word that would trend worldwide within minutes? Liar? The Russell Senate Office Building's hearing room had witnessed countless political theater performances, but the atmosphere that December afternoon felt different. Mahogany panels absorbed the tension. C-SPAN cameras captured every micro-expression. Congressional staffers positioned along the walls sensed something unprecedented approaching. Not routine political sparring, but a public dismantling of credibility in real time. Patel entered wearing a charcoal suit that seemed too perfectly pressed for someone about to face career annihilation. His jaw set firm. His eyes scanned the room with the confidence of a man accustomed to being the smartest person present. He'd survived controversies before: the Russia investigation battles, the classification disputes, the loyalty accusations. This was supposed to be his coronation hearing, not his execution. But Thomas Massie had been preparing for months. The Kentucky congressman sat 3 seats from center, his laptop open to a folder marked Patel, Epstein, Contradiction. For 17 weeks, his small staff had compiled every interview, every podcast appearance, every social media post where Patel had discussed the Epstein files. They'd built not just a case, but a timeline of promises that stretched from bold declarations to convenient amnesia. Massie's opening question cut through preliminary pleasantries like a scalpel through flesh. Mr. Patel, on November 14th, 2023, you appeared on The Sean Ryan Show, a podcast with over 400,000 live listeners, and you stated, and I quote, "I will release every single page of Jeffrey Epstein's files. The American people deserve to know who was on those planes, who visited that island, and what our government has been hiding." Do you remember making that statement? The room's temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Patel's knuckles whitened as he gripped his prepared statement. His media training kicked in. The pause, the thoughtful expression, the careful word selection. Congressman, I remember that interview, and I stand by my commitment to transparency within the legal frameworks that... Stop. Massie's interruption cracked like a whip. Reporters in the gallery leaned forward. FBI officials in the back rows exchanged glances. That's not what I asked. I asked if you remember making that specific promise, yes or no. Yes, but... Thank you. Now, last week, December 9th, 2025, you told Senator Durbin, and this is on the record, that, quote, "The court-ordered seals on the Epstein materials prevent any FBI director from unilaterally releasing those documents without judicial authorization." That's what you said, correct? Patel's face went ghostly white. Everyone watching could see the trap closing. That's correct. Senator Durbin did ask about... So, which is it, Mr. Patel? Were you lying in 2023 when you promised to release the files, or are you lying now about the legal barriers? The silence that followed stretched taut like a wire ready to snap. Committee staff cut their whispered conversations. Even the stenographer looked up from her machine, sensing history being written in real time. Patel attempted deflection, the Washington specialty. Congressman, I think there's a misunderstanding about the difference between advocating for transparency and the actual legal mechanisms that govern... Massie wasn't finished. He had more ammunition. Let me help clarify your memory, Mr. Patel. On that same podcast in 2023, the host specifically asked you, "What? But aren't there legal restrictions?" And you responded, your exact words, "I don't care about the legal restrictions. When you have evidence of powerful people exploiting children, you release it. Period. That's what leadership looks like." The quote hit the room like a physical force. Democratic members who'd been checking their phones suddenly looked up. Republican allies who'd promised to defend Patel shifted uncomfortably. Cameras zoomed in on his face as color drained from his cheeks. Do you still believe that, Mr. Patel? Do you still believe that when you have evidence of powerful people exploiting children, you release it, period? Or was that just convenient rhetoric when you were selling books and building a media brand? The context of that statement was the context was crystal clear. You were positioning yourself as the crusader who would finally expose the truth that establishment figures wanted buried. You built an entire public persona around being the man brave enough to defy the system. And now that you might actually have the power to do it, suddenly you've discovered legal barriers you claimed didn't matter. But then came the moment that would define the entire hearing. Senator Amy Klobuchar, known for her prosecutorial precision, leaned into her microphone with a question that landed like a precision-guided missile. Mr. Patel, are you aware that in 2019, the then FBI director had full authority to request judicial review of the sealed Epstein materials under the Freedom of Information Act's public interest exception? Are you aware that the FBI has successfully argued for unsealing in dozens of cases involving public corruption? Are you aware that the legal barriers you're citing are not absolute, but rather require an FBI director willing to actually make the request? Patel gripped the witness table so tightly his knuckles turned bone white. Senator, I'm not familiar with every specific legal mechanism from 2019, but you're not familiar? Klobuchar's voice rose with controlled outrage. You're the nominee to lead the FBI, an organization you've criticized for years for lacking transparency, and you're not familiar with the legal tools that would allow you to keep the promise you made to millions of Americans? The classic Washington crisis management tactic of claiming ignorance convinced no one. Congressman Jamie Raskin entered the fray, his voice carrying the weight of constitutional expertise. Mr. Patel, let me read you something. In 2023, you wrote on social media, "The Epstein client list is being protected by the deep state. They claim privacy laws and ongoing investigations, but it's all a cover-up. When I have power, I'll blow the doors off this conspiracy." That post has 2.3 million views. Do you stand by it? I stand by fighting corruption, and that's not an answer. Do you stand by calling the protection of those files a deep state cover-up? Because if it was a cover-up then, and you're now citing the same legal protections, aren't you becoming part of that cover-up? The question hung in the air like an irrevocable accusation. Massie, sensing Patel's defenses crumbling, delivered the coup de grace. Mr. Patel, I'm going to make this very simple. If confirmed as FBI director, will you formally request judicial review to unseal the Epstein files within your first 90 days in office? Yes or no? The room held its collective breath. Patel's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Congressman, I would need to review the specific legal requirements with the FBI's general counsel and... Liar! The word exploded from Massie with such force that security officers instinctively tensed. The congressman stood, his chair scraping against marble floors, his finger pointing directly at the nominee. You are a liar, Mr. Patel. You lied to the American people in 2023 when you knew you couldn't deliver. Or you're lying now because it's politically inconvenient. But either way, you're sitting in that chair, lying under oath about your intentions. Chairman Mike Johnson banged his gavel frantically. The congressman is out of order. That language is... I don't care about order. Massie's voice carried to every corner of the room. I care about truth. This man promised parents, survivors, and every American who wants justice for Epstein's victims that he would expose the truth. Now he's hiding behind the same legal excuses he mocked others for using. That's not leadership. That's cowardice wrapped in ambition. The mask had slipped completely. Patel, face flushed with defensive anger, abandoned all remaining composure. How dare you question my commitment to victims? I've spent my entire career fighting. Fighting for what? Media appearances? Book deals? You've spent your career building a brand as the truth teller, And now that you might have actual power, you've discovered that truth-telling has consequences you're not willing to face. The philosophical foundation of Patel's entire public persona collapsed in real time. Senator Richard Blumenthal, his voice heavy with disappointment, added the historical context that would frame every news story. Mr. Patel, I've been in the Senate for 14 years. I've watched nominees dodge questions, equivocate, and parse words. But I've rarely seen someone so comprehensively contradict their own public statements. You didn't just change your position, you've adopted the exact position you once called corrupt. Minutes after the hearing concluded at 4:23 p.m., media erupted in unprecedented fashion. CNN cut into regular programming with a chyron that dominated screens. Breaking: FBI nominee called liar over Epstein files promises. MSNBC led with legal analyst Glenn Kirshner stating, "What we witnessed wasn't just political theater, it was the destruction of credibility in real time. Patel's confirmation is now virtually impossible." But the real earthquake hit social media. Yes, Epstein liar began trending within 17 minutes, accumulating 340,000 tweets in the first hour. Massie was right followed close behind. On TikTok, clips of Massie shouting, "Liar," went viral, accumulating 8.7 million views by midnight. Young creators who'd never watched C-SPAN suddenly cared about FBI nomination hearings. Twitter flooded with side-by-side video comparisons, Patel in 2023 promising to blow the doors off, versus Patel in 2025 citing legal barriers. The contradiction needed no commentary. The videos spoke for themselves. Conservative commentators who'd championed Patel suddenly went silent. Liberal activists who'd opposed him from the start experienced validation, but most striking was the bipartisan disgust from those who'd believed his original promises. A domestic violence survivor who'd followed the Epstein case for years tweeted, "I believed him. I actually thought someone finally cared enough to expose the truth. I feel betrayed doesn't begin to describe it." Her post received 127,000 likes. By evening, Republican senators who'd pledged support began issuing carefully worded statements about needing more time to review the testimony. In Washington speak, this meant Patel's nomination was dead. Former federal prosecutor Preet Bharara appeared on multiple networks stating, "The Epstein files issue aside, what this hearing revealed is a nominee willing to say anything to anyone depending on what serves his interests in that moment. That's disqualifying for any position, let alone FBI director." Legal experts noted the broader implications. Georgetown law professor Jonathan Turley wrote, "Patel's contradiction exposes a fundamental problem in modern political discourse. Promising the impossible to build influence, then discovering reality once actual responsibility arrives." But unlike typical politicians who can pivot quietly, Patel's promises were so specific, so public, and so recent that the contradiction became undeniable. The White House issued no statement. That silence spoke volumes. As December 16th became December 17th, as the news cycle continued its relentless march, one question dominated Washington's whispered conversations in congressional hallways, at think tank lunches, and in late-night calls between senators. Had Kash Patel ever intended to release the Epstein files, or had it always been a calculated performance designed to build a following among those desperate for justice? The question now wasn't whether Patel's nomination would survive. By midnight, 5 Republican senators had privately told leadership they would vote no, making confirmation mathematically impossible. The question was whether American political culture had created a system that rewarded bold promises with no intention of delivery, where building a brand mattered more than building trust, where loyalty to power trumped loyalty to truth. And in that cramped congressional briefing room, where winter light had filtered through bulletproof windows, where Thomas Massie had called a nominee a liar to his face, where cameras had captured the collapse of credibility in real time, perhaps the answer had already been written. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.